Discover 13 spine-chilling true haunted tales as Rainfall reveals Sinister Secrets Volume 392. The rain fell heavy that night, each droplet a whisper of dread. Sarah stumbled through her front door, soaked to the bone, the chill of the damp air biting her skin. It was one of those haunting nights, where shadows twisted in the corners of memory, and the stillness of the suburban streets felt wrong. As she sank onto the couch, the world outside blurred in the downpour, reflecting her weary soul and those of her two children asleep upstairs, little beings blissfully unaware of the darkness looming just beyond their front porch. But something caught her eye. A flicker, a shadow darting across the street like an omen. Her breath caught, and the shadow lingered in her mind, melding with murmured tales from her childhood, the Martinez family. The ones who vanished without a trace, their laughter swallowed whole by the oppressive silence of the empty house at the end of the block. It was the stuff of nightmares, replaced long ago by safety and normalcy. Or so she thought that in the days that followed, the rain poured as if the heavens mourned. Her children, with innocent faces framed in the dim glow of the living room, spoke of the man in the rain. At first, their stories seemed sweet, like bedtime whispers of a guardian watching over them. But then came the details, the way he peered through the droplets, his intentions twisted and malevolent. Sarah's heart raced, cold sweat trailing down her back. They described him too closely, as if he wore the guise of familiarity, and she felt the first twinges of panic tightening around her throat. Rumors spiraled through the neighborhood, the rise of crime, the darkness creeping in beneath the facade of normal life. Anxiety gripped Sarah like a vice. She couldn't trust anyone, not even Frank, their neighbor, the former police officer who haunted the whispers of those who knew him. His eyes, once warm and welcoming, had morphed into something else, something watchful, as if he savored their vulnerability. As the rain picked up, desperation echoed in her silence. This isn't happening, she thought, trying to piece together a solution. But dread loomed, the truth settling like fog in her mind. What if the protector her children saw was, in fact, the predator they had been warned against? The walls felt like they were closing in, each shadow deeper, every creak in the floorboards more menacing. Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. That night, as thunder crashed against the roof and the rain hammered like frantic fingers at her window, Sarah made her resolve. She couldn't sit idly while threats blurred the lines between friend and foe. Heart pounding in her chest, she gathered herself to confront the darkness standing outside. The deep bags under her eyes felt heavier with each passing second. The storm outside mirrored the tempest within her. She needed to shield her children from a danger they couldn't yet comprehend. She felt the pulse of fear beat in her veins, the solitude closing in tightly around her. In this suburban sanctuary that had become a fortress of horrors, one pressing question clawed at her mind: how deep did the shadows run? As she gripped the front door handle, her breath hitching in her throat, she braced for a confrontation that would shatter every illusion she held dear. The door creaked open, each sound swallowed by the torrential rain. Sarah stepped outside, her heart pounding like a war drum. The heavy air clung to her skin, a suffocating layer of dread. She squinted into the darkness, where shadows danced just out of reach. What felt like eyes were watching her, hiding in the spaces between the raindrops, or was it just her panic playing tricks? "Mommy?" A voice called from the house. It was Emily, her youngest. The sweet innocence of her daughter sliced through the fog of dread, pulling Sarah back for a moment. "Stay inside. I'll be right back," she shouted, forcing herself to sound strong. But her voice trembled slightly. She dared to take another step, crossing onto her front porch, the wood slick beneath her feet. "Mommy!" The voice cut through the noise, more urgent now. A pang of worry twisted in her gut as she turned to head back, but a figure caught her eye. Drenched in rain, the man stood at the edge of the block. He was cloaked, twisting shadows weaving around him like living fog. Though she couldn't make out his features through the curtain of rain, a primal terror shot through her. Her instincts screamed for her to flee, to pull her children close. But whatever twisted fate awaited her, it had arrived. "Mommy, please." Emily's cry pierced through the storm. "Stay there." She fought to keep her composure and keep her heart from exploding in her chest. Taking a step back, she tried to keep the man in her peripheral vision, praying he wouldn't move closer. She had to protect Emily. She had to keep them all safe. She took a steady breath. "What do you want?" she called out, forcing her voice not to shake. The figure didn't move. Was he even real, or had her mind begun to fracture under the weight of paranoia? But then, she saw it. Something glimmered in the shadows, an eye, reflecting light like a predator's gaze. Sharp and fixated, it held her, and suddenly she wasn't just a mother. She was a helpless prey, paralyzed by fear. The man raised a hand, palm open, as if to beckon her closer. A trickle of water ran down the back of her neck, chilling her even further. The temperature dropped for a moment as a gust of wind swept through the street, and in that chilling breeze, she thought she heard laughter, giddy and cold. "You shouldn't have ignored the warnings, Sarah." The voice slithered through the rain, wrapped in dark amusement. Her blood ran cold. How did he know her name? "Stay away from my children," she yelled, the fearless roar of a mother battling real horror. But inside, terror gnawed through her confidence, leaving only a raw vulnerability. Suddenly, another clap of thunder exploded, and with it, the figure began to dissolve into the shadows, creeping back into the fabric of the night. But the smell of damp earth mixed with something rotten lingered like a foul ghost. Sarah turned on her heels and rushed back inside, slamming the door behind her. "Mommy!" Emily was crying, fear etched on her small face. "Everything's going to be okay." But deep down, Sarah knew that the game had just begun. The shadows outside had no intention of retreating, and neither did the unsettling feeling of dread that settled like a dense fog around her heart. Was this just the beginning? She had to know more about the man in the rain. But where would it lead? As she locked the door, every instinct throbbed with the question, what if the real danger wasn't out there but right here inside her own home? The air inside the house felt thick, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Sarah's pulse echoed in her ears, drowning out the sound of the rain pounding against the roof. Emily pressed herself against her mother, her small, trembling frame radiating fear. "Mommy, who was that?" Emily's voice quavered. "I don't know, sweetie. But I won't let anything happen to you," Sarah whispered, desperately scanning the living room. The dim light from the lamp cast eerie shadows that danced like phantoms across the walls, warping every corner into something sinister. Her heart raced. All her instincts told her to find safety, but could she trust the safety of the familiar? From the kitchen, the creak of a cupboard sounded. Her breath caught in her throat. "Stay here," she instructed, but as she took a step forward, she felt the icy grip of dread bolt through her. The creak hadn't come from her, but from somewhere deeper within the house, a sound that shouldn't exist in the otherwise still air. Turning slowly, she peered into the kitchen. The soft glow from the window illuminated nothing but emptiness. Shaking, she stepped inside, forcing her feet to move. Perhaps it was just a stray wind or a loose shutter. She held on to hope, but that hope swiftly slipped through her fingers. A sudden chill swept through the room, bringing with it a bitter smell, like decay. Goosebumps rose on Sarah's arms. "Mommy, I don't like it," Emily whined, inching closer to her. "I know," Sarah murmured, her mind racing. She fought back the fear, reminding herself of the match she had stashed for emergencies. All she needed was to make it to the living room where she could grab it. There, in the safety of light, they would be okay. Back to the living room, she reached for the matchbox on the shelf. But just as her fingers brushed against the cold wood, the lights flickered, then plunged them into darkness. Panic surged with a vicious intensity. She couldn't breathe. "Emily! Stay by my side!" Sarah commanded, her voice breaking against the deepening void. She cursed herself for being drawn into this trap, now left vulnerable in the dark. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Not the soft padding of a child, but heavy, deliberate, and slow. It was a sound that stepped through her resolve, dragging her back towards the unbearable dread. "Mommy," Emily whimpered, clutching her mother's leg. "I can't see anything, just hold on tight," Sarah whispered, feeling her heart pound erratically against the thrumming darkness. She stumbled backward toward the stairwell, the hand railing cold against her palm. The footsteps grew closer. Heavy. A chill crept along her spine. A shadow materialized at the end of the hall. The man was back, not just a figment of her imagination anymore. The features still concealed, but the weight of his presence was unmistakable, a living nightmare. "Sarah," his voice slithered through the air like mist. How could he know her name? "Get away from my family." She felt a surge of bravery flow through her, igniting her senses. But he just stood there, the shadows twisting around him. Then, the sound of soft giggles filled the space. Not from Emily, but something deeper, darker. It wrapped around Sarah, pulling her toward despair. A sliver of doubt crept in. Were there others there? Causing the last vestige of normalcy she clung to shatter. What if this wasn't just about the man? What if he was merely a pawn in a larger game? "I'll find you, Sarah," he hissed, the darkness itching closer. With no time for hesitation, she grabbed Emily's hand and bolted for the door leading to the basement. "We need to go. Quick." But as they moved past him, the air thickened with the promise of malevolence. Just as they reached the door, a high-pitched laugh rang out, echoing off the walls as if the house itself was alive with mockery. What awaited them below? The darkness of the basement felt alive, each step echoing louder in her chest. Sarah had one question curling in her mind, tight and unyielding: how far would she have to go to keep Emily safe? As the door creaked open, she felt a gust of cold air rush up from the darkness below. Was there no escaping the terror now settling deep into the heart of her home? The basement door swung open, revealing a gaping mouth of blackness. It seemed to inhale the light from the living room, greedily devouring every ounce of warmth and hope. Sarah hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to turn back, but she couldn't do that. Emily needed her. "Come on, baby. We're going to be okay," she urged, forcing her legs to move. The pitch-black stairwell loomed before them, an endless descent where nightmares could thrive unseen. She took a deep breath, hoping against hope that this darkness held the key to their escape. With Emily's small hand clasped tightly in hers, they stepped down. The first step creaked ominously beneath their weight, followed by the second, then the third. Each noise felt amplified, like an alarm to whatever lay in wait. Sarah squinted into the darkness, trying to make out the familiar shapes she had grown used to over the years. But shadows flitted at the edges of her vision, and the air became heavy with a suffocating chill. "Mommy?" Emily whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I'm right here," Sarah replied, forcing a calmness into her tone even as her heart raced. There was no denying the terror creeping in. Fear clung to her like spider silk, wrapping her tighter with every moment spent in the dark. Suddenly, another laugh echoed, louder this time, taunting them from beyond the stairs. It wasn't just laughter, it was an echo of joy laced with malicious intent. It darted past her, wrapping her in a whirlwind of dread. What was down here with them? "Mommy, make it stop!" Emily cried, pressing her face against Sarah's leg. "Just a little further," Sarah encouraged, heart hammering in her chest. She could feel the cold sweat forming on her brow as she pushed onward into the suffocating shadows. The basement seemed to stretch on forever, a labyrinth of uncertainty. As they reached the bottom, the faint glimmer of a dying bulb flickered to life above them, casting a sinister glow on the cobweb-riddled walls. Here, the air felt stagnant and stale, a warning sign that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Why do we always hide in the basement?" Emily murmured, clutching Sarah's leg tightly. "I don't know, honey. I think we need to find a way out from here," Sarah replied, her voice trembling. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she scanned the room, the familiar clutter suddenly feeling ominous. Old boxes loomed like sentinels, each shadow whispering secrets of the past. "Look!" Emily pointed, her voice a sharp spark in the oppressive silence. There, in the far corner, a dusty mirror hung on the wall. It was cracked in several places. Sarah squinted, drawn to it. Something moved in the glass reflections that didn't match their own. Figures swirling, faces contorted in silent screams. "Emily, stay close." Without thinking, Sarah stepped forward to cover her daughter's eyes, but before she could, a twisted face appeared, eyes empty and dark, beckoning her with a finger that barely held human form. "Mommy!" Emily shrieked, tearing away from Sarah's grip. "No!" Panic pressed against Sarah's throat as she lunged for her daughter, but the basement door slammed shut with a reverberating thud. A cold chill swept through the room, filling it with echoes of laughter and whispers that crawled under her skin. Sarah felt every heartbeat thrum in her ears, drowning out reason. They were trapped. And whatever waited in the dark was no longer hidden. "Emily!" She spun around, eyes wide, searching, but the basement was closing in. Shadows shifted and twisted, and the laughter grew louder, made real, as if the very essence of fear lingered behind her. "Let us find a way out," she yelled, more to convince herself than anything. What would she do? How much more could the darkness take? With dread coursing through her veins, she placed her hand on the mirror. But as she did, the chilling truth clawed its way in. What would they find reflected back at them? A low rumble echoed from deep within the shadows, and something began to stir. The moment her hand made contact with the cracked surface of the mirror, the room seemed to shudder around them. The air thickened, vibrating with a low hum that felt like a heartbeat. Shadows danced in corners, writhing like dark serpents, and Sarah's pulse quickened, each thud a reminder of how truly vulnerable they were. "Mommy!" Emily's small voice trembled, but Sarah could barely register her daughter's fear as a chilling dread paralyzed her. The reflection in the mirror twisted more violently, the faces of those trapped within stretching and contorting as if they were trying to escape. "Emily, come here." Sarah snapped out of her fascination and reached for her daughter, but the child was already a step ahead, drawn to the mirror as if it were aflame. "Look, Mommy. They're sad," Emily exclaimed, wide-eyed. The wailing in the mirror grew louder, a cacophony of lost souls that seemed to seep into Sarah's mind, drowning her in unending despair. She wanted to pull Emily back, but her feet were glued to the floor, and a shiver crawled down her spine. Suddenly, the whispers merged into words, each one echoing like a death knell. Help us get away from there," Sarah shouted, shattering the spell. But as she lunged toward Emily, she felt an icy gust brush past her, a breath of something monstrous lurking just beyond the edges of the light. The bulb flickered again, casting their surroundings in a dizzying light and dark pattern. The figures in the mirror were now pressing against the glass, desperate hands stretching toward Sarah and Emily, eyes pleading yet devoid of hope. One specter, a man in tattered clothes, trapped under layers of sorrow, opened his mouth in a silent scream. Sarah's heart felt as if it were about to burst. "Mommy, I want to help them," Emily cried, stepping closer to the mirror, her little foot brushing against the dust-covered floor. "Emily, no." Sarah lunged forward, but the age-old whispers surged in volume, forming an unyielding barrier that pulled the child toward the glass. In a split second, Sarah felt a pull, a magnetic force gripping her heart and mind. It was as if the darkness itself beckoned her. She fought against it, the terror of losing Emily fueling her will. With a desperate strength, she reached out, grabbing Emily's arm just as the whispers turned sharp, piercing through her resolve. "Join us forever, stop it," Sarah yelled, shaking her daughter while the mirror began to cloud over, blocking the figures just as quickly as they had appeared. She pulled Emily back, clutching her tightly, breathless as she fought to reclaim her own sanity amidst the chaos. But the darkness quaked with fury, and the walls seemed to close in. The air thickened, suffocating, electric with malice. "You can't escape." A crack splintered through the mirror, the glass chattering like breaking bones. With one final, defiant howl, Sarah turned, holding Emily tight against her chest, bolting toward the far side of the room. "Mommy, what's happening?" Panic laced Emily's voice, cutting through the darkness. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," Sarah shouted, heart racing like a wild thing. But the door was still sealed tight, mocking them with its silence. As she pounded against it, a new noise swelled behind her, the laughter morphed into high-pitched shrieks, pulling at the edges of her sanity. The mirror now cracked wide, tendrils of darkness spilling out into the basement, swirling like smoke eager to consume. With nowhere to run, Sarah moved instinctively toward the boxes. There had to be something, anything that could buy them time. But then she felt it, the icy fingers of the darkness crawling over her skin, wrapping around her throat. "Mommy! Don't let it take me!" Emily screamed, her small voice filled with terror that mirrored Sarah's own. Sarah fought against the suffocating grip, eyes darting between the chaotic shadows and her daughter's frantic expression. The whispered pleas echoed louder now, tearing at the fabric of her mind. What if the mirror was just a gateway? What if they were meant to join them? No! She shouted again, her desperation igniting her resolve. She needed to find a way. As Emily clung to her, Sarah felt her own fear transform into rage. "We will not be claimed." But in that moment, a sharp crack sounded from the mirror, and a dark figure began to emerge. Was it too late for them to escape? Or had they unwittingly become part of the curse? The figure stepped through the fissured glass, a silhouette wreathed in shadows that flickered like candle flames. Sarah's breath hitched, and her vision narrowed, riveted on the affront of that dreadful apparition. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but her legs felt permanently rooted to the ground. "Mommy, who is it?" Emily whispered, small fingers clutching Sarah's shirt tightly. The innocent question cut deeper than the horror itself. With a flick of its wrist, the figure seemed to absorb the dim light, transforming the room into a coffin of shadows. The air thickened, oppressive and choking, as if each breath was measured against a mounting dread. The whispers morphed, turning into a haunting melody that unraveled Sarah's sanity thread by thread. She could almost make out a rhythm, a sinister lullaby wrapped in sorrow. "Help us, join us," the twisted voice pleaded, straining against the barrier of fear that Sarah had constructed around her heart. Emily's gaze drifted toward the darkness that oozed like viscous oil, its texture repulsive yet captivating. The pair of sparkling eyes within the figure widened, and an unholy smile revealed a mouth full of sharp, jagged teeth. "Come play with us," it hissed, the voice a blend of charm and menace. A chill rippled through Sarah. "No!" She screamed, dragging Emily against her, the child's fear seeping into her bones. "We have to go. Now." But reality contorted. The ground felt alive beneath her feet, shuddering like a coiled snake about to strike. She stumbled back against the boxes, their jagged edges digging into her back, but she refused to let go of her daughter. The figure took a step forward, moving with an unnatural grace that seemed to mock the stilted heartbeat of fear pulsing in Sarah's chest. Desperately, she cast her gaze around the room, seeking salvation. The boxes. They had to be hiding something to fight off this darkness. In the depths of her mind, an idea flared, something she might use to escape, to ward off whatever that entity was. "Emily, hold on tight," she instructed, her voice a tremor barely keeping itself steady. She crouched, fumbling through the boxes while keeping her body angled to shield her daughter. The shadows writhed hungrily, watching her movements with insatiable thirst. Her fingers brushed against something cold, a flashlight. Instinct kicking in, she grasped it, shoving the trembling child behind her. "Get back!" she roared, twisting the flashlight on. The beam shot through the darkness, slicing through the air like a blade. For a heartbeat, silence enveloped them, a cocoon of brightness in a sea of despair. But the bulb flickered ominously as the figure recoiled. Shadows snapped back, hissing like 1,000 snakes in retreat. There's nowhere to hide, it sneered, momentarily obscured, yet its voice drummed against the walls of Sarah's mind, each word a weight pressing down her resolve. "Leave us alone!" Sarah shouted, directing the beam toward the writhing figure, her heart pounding like a war drum. This could buy them seconds, precious seconds they needed, the shadows hissed, swirling dangerously close. She could feel them inching beneath her skin, an eerie tickle dancing over her bones, creeping toward her sanity. "Mommy, what's happening?" Emily pressed against Sarah, wide-eyed, her whole essence trembling. "I'll protect you." Sarah gasped, pushing past the suffocating dread, digging deep for the strength she never knew she had. She turned, shining the beam toward the mirror. What if the key to their escape lay within its depths? The darkness rippled in response, almost as if aware of her intentions. Before she could think, Sarah charged forward, determined. The shadows screamed, 1,000 terrible cries that clawed at her ears. In that moment, she didn't know if she was about to shatter their horrific grip or hand herself and her daughter to the abyss. And so she aimed the light squarely at the mirror, believing against all reason that perhaps it would fire back against the encroaching darkness. As the beam hit the glass, a blinding flash enveloped everything, whiteness seeping into the edges of her vision. Would it drive them away, or pull her into the depths of the nightmare? Just then, before the light swallowed her whole, Emily's voice broke through the chaos. "Mommy, look!" Sarah turned in time to see the figure falter, the shadows stuttering and a terrible realization dawning on her. But what had she truly unleashed? The mirror was no longer a window, but a glowing trap. Would they be free, or would darkness consume them both? As the brightness exploded around them, it felt like the end, or perhaps just the beginning. The flash of light enveloped Sarah and Emily, a blinding burst that ignited the shadows into a wild dance, flickering like frightened fireflies desperate to escape the impending doom. For a moment, it felt like they were suspended in time, trapped in a purgatory where reality itself fell away. Then, just as swiftly as the light had appeared, it fractured, spilling them back into their surroundings. The room was transformed. The walls pulsed with a heat that made Sarah's skin crawl. The figure stood frozen before the mirror, its sharp teeth bared in a snarl, fury radiating from it like heat waves off asphalt. What had seemed like a mere silhouette now emerged as a haunting composite of nightmares, its skin pallid and stretched tight, bones threatening to burst through like shadows hardened into flesh. "Run!" Sarah shouted, wrestling with the surge of terror clawing at her consciousness. She shoved Emily behind her again, the little girl's whimpers barely registering in the chaotic whirlpool of her thoughts. Escape was imperative, but the way forward felt twisted, like navigating a treacherous labyrinth of horrors that could swallow them whole, yet their only path led straight into the heart of the darkness. The air thickened, molding into a suffocating miasma around them. Sarah felt an unnatural chill seep through her veins, paralyzing her limbs, filling her with an overwhelming sense of dread. Despite the flashlight, it became harder to breathe as if the shadows were expanding, devouring the space and squeezing the life out of everything near. "Mommy!" Emily's voice pierced through the tension, raw and frightened. Sarah could barely process it. All she could feel was the oppressive weight looming ever closer. With a deep breath, Sarah pivoted, casting the beam back toward the figure. "Get back! You can't have us!" She yelled, and with desperation propelling her, she stepped closer to the glowing mirror, hoping against all odds the light held some hidden power. The darkness writhed, reacting violently as shadows lashed out. "Join us, Sarah!" The figure snarled, its voice an echoing cacophony of anguish and rage. "You cannot escape the family." Those words struck Sarah like a physical blow. Family? What did it mean? She tried to push the thought aside, but a flicker of recognition bubbled to the surface of her racing mind. She realized then, the figure wasn't merely a monster, it was something she'd been running from all her life, a specter of her past clawing its way back to consume her. "Mommy!" Emily's shout brought her back, grounding her back in the present. The girl's eyes were round with fear, but they held something more resolve. Emily stepped forward, her tiny body shaking yet defiant. "I want to go with it." In that moment, something shifted. Fueled by her daughter's bravery, Sarah felt a surge of energy. What if instead of fleeing, they fought? The flashlight wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of defiance. "Emily, we can do this together. Just trust me." Sarah gripped the flashlight tighter, the beam steadying again, illuminating the sinister being. The air felt charged as strands of their strength intertwined, a beacon against the suffocating dark. "Leave us alone." They echoed in unison, voices reverberating with newfound strength. The figure howled, the sound twisting, a mix of rage and pain. It recoiled, shadows splintering around its form, but something dark and wet slithered from the mirror, coiling around Emily's feet like a malevolent serpent. "Run!" Sarah shouted again. She grabbed Emily's hand, yanking her toward the doorway. The figure's anguished cries echoed behind them as they dashed forward, the tornado of darkness swallowing up the room, pillars of shadow collapsing around them, but just as they reached the threshold, a sudden jerk halted their escape. The mirror quaked violently, the glass rippling like water. "You will join the others. You cannot break free." It shrieked, its voice joining the chorus of pleading souls. With a final burst of adrenaline, Sarah pulled Emily through the doorway just as the mirror exploded. Shards flying like blades through the air. Darkness flooded out behind them, a tangible weight that threatened to crush them. As they stumbled into the hallway, the echoes of despair faded slightly, but dread pumped through their veins like icy poison. Had they really escaped the nightmare, or was this just the beginning? Outside the house, Sarah's heart raced as she turned, scanning the darkened windows. Somewhere, in the depths of the house, something was still watching. "Mommy, we got away," Emily whispered, but the uncertainty laced through her voice, followed by the dreadful stillness that enveloped them. And then, like a whispering wind, the air thickened again. "Join us." A shadowed figure loomed back in view, flickering at the edge of their vision. What now? Sarah thought, panic creeping up her spine. Was there nowhere safe to go? What had they awakened? As the shadows began to creep toward the door, she realized with dawning horror that the fight was far from over. Every instinct screamed for them to run, but now they stood facing their deepest fears. With nowhere left to turn, Sarah clutched the flashlight tighter, heart hammering like a war drum, ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. What would it demand of her next? The shadows coiled around Sarah and Emily, a serpentine mass that shushed like a predator stalking its prey. Panic surged through Sarah's veins, igniting a fight-or-flight response so primal it drowned out reason. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to turn. The black figures, once lurking in the periphery, now lunged towards them with grotesque speed, whispering sweet promises of despair. "Close your eyes, Em," she shouted, feeling a tremor run through her daughter's small hand. She could see Emily's fear morphing into something deeper, something desperate. The flashlight flickered ominously in her grasp, its beam wavering in sync with her erratic heartbeat. "Mommy, I can't," Emily cried, eyes wide, rooted to the spot as the shadows writhed closer. The tether of fear bound them, cementing their terror in the stillness thickening around them. "Look away. You have to look away." Desperation clawed at Sarah, but the shadows had taken on a life of their own. They crept in closer, fingers stretching and curling around the little girl's ankles, their whispering sighs a discordant melody of family and love, each note sharper than a knife. "Join us," they rasped, the voices melding into a familiar cadence echoing through Sarah's mind. The memories they conjured were suffocating. Unveiling faces she thought she could forget. Images flashed, her mother's warm embrace twisted into a chilling grasp, her father's laughter warped into maniacal shrieks. The echoes hammered in her skull, their haunting familiarity blurring the line between safety and malevolence. "No, no, you're not real," Sarah managed to choke out, anger flaring in the face of blind terror. She tugged hard at Emily, pulling her closer, a barrier of maternal instinct igniting between them. "We're not going with you." To her surprise, the shadows paused. Their advances hesitated, as if stung by her fierce defiance. The air, however, felt charged, each breath they took heavy with tension and dread. The darkness coiled, lingering for a moment, contemplative, caught between the desire to consume and the force that radiated from Sarah's resolve. "Mommy!" Emily whimpered, her tiny voice breaking the stillness, fragility laced with her innocence. A rush of protectiveness surged within Sarah. The resolve morphed into something more. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Emily's future. In that moment, Sarah raised the flashlight high, the beam stabilizing as her fear metamorphosed into a fierce conviction. "I said, leave us alone!" She roared, the strength of her voice shocking her even as it echoed down the dimly lit hallway. Light pierced through the dark, a tangible force against the shadows swarming them. With a blinding flash, the beam illuminated the encroaching darkness, revealing fleeting glimpses of the figures that cowered against its brightness. Their forms were grotesque, unearthly, flickering as though in turmoil, something trapped within them scrambling for release. "Emily, cover your eyes." In a sudden burst of fierce clarity, Sarah twisted the flashlight, pointing it towards the ground and casting a large circle of light around them. Boundaries were drawn. The shadows wailed in frustration, shrieking echoes bouncing off the walls, vibrating through the air, hitting Sarah like a physical blow. She pressed on, her heart racing. But as the air thinned and the room cooled, she felt a sinister shift. Over the wails, she heard a deeper voice. "You cannot hold back the family, Sarah. We will always be a part of you. Don't listen, Mommy." Emily's voice was urgent, tugging at Sarah's focus. The shadows shivered at the sound, bright and pure against the dark chorus. The darkness recoiled, rippling like disturbed water silently threatening to swallow them whole, but something was changing. The flashlight's beam was fading, flickering ominously as though it, too, was caught in a battle between light and darkness. Dread curled in Sarah's stomach had she just delayed the inevitable. She could feel them regrouping, swirling around the edges of the light, hungry and eager. "Now what?" she whispered, dread crawling up her spine as firelight flickered dimly. The shadows pressed closer, their whispers morphing from promises to threats. "Come back, we're waiting forever." And as the flashlight sputtered once more, dying slowly in her hand, she realized with a sinking heart that the fight was far from over. In that moment of desperation, the dark tightened its grip, ready to crush any flicker of hope. "Mommy!" Emily called again, looking up with wide eyes as the shadows loomed larger. The darkness struck with a sudden, scorching blast, sending Sarah staggering back. She felt her grip slip. And with a heart-stopping realization, she knew they wouldn't just take Emily, they aimed to break her, piece by agonizing piece. As the light flickered and dimmed, Sarah shouted, "Not today." But within her gut, the clock was ticking. The fear clawing back into her throat was loud and unforgiving. What awaited them in the depths of the house? Would they become one with the shadows or find a way to shatter the chains of the darkness once and for all? The shadows lunged again, a wave of cold that seemed to seep into Sarah's bones. The flashlight flickered ominously, its once bright beam now a feeble glimmer against the encroaching darkness. Sarah's heart raced as she staggered backward, instinct urging her to shield Emily at all costs. "Stay close," she gasped, pulling her daughter against her, feeling Emily's small body tremble against her side. But deep down, Sarah felt the suffocating weight of despair. Could they really hold on? The darkness didn't just creep, it beckoned, whispering sweet words that wound around her mind like a vice. "Mommy, help," Emily whimpered, the tremor in her voice folding a blade of ice into Sarah's chest. The shadows writhed, their sinister energy pulsating with a rhythm of hunger. A clawed hand brushed against Sarah's ankle, icy fingers coiling up her leg, seeking a way in seeking to tear her apart. No! She screamed, stomping her foot down in defiance, unwilling to yield. With a sudden rush of adrenaline, she swung the flashlight toward the encroaching figures, illuminating distorted faces twisted in mockery. They were her family, her past, her secrets, horrors carved from her darkest memories. But Sarah wouldn't succumb, not now. She was fighting for more than her own life. Remember the stories, Emily. She forced the words out, gasping as they echoed into the folds of darkness. The power of light, it drives away the dark. She had heard her grandmother's tales, the old witching stories about light and shadows clashing, about courage and love kindling flames. As if in response, a moment of clarity cut through her fear. Sarah tightened her grip on the flashlight once more, infusing it with her resolve. We need to believe. Together. She couldn't let Emily see her fear, not now. She had to be the fortress, the protective wall against the onslaught. Her voice steadied as she spoke, rallying through the panic that threatened to drown them both. We are stronger than them. We have each other. A flicker of energy coursed through the flashlight, like a pulse, igniting the small space around them. The shadows recoiled, uncertainty flickering in their forms, their whispers turning into high-pitched shrieks of agony that echoed inside Sarah's skull. Join us, understand, they hissed, a sickening symphony of despair wrapping around her mind. But stronger than their call, the love for Emily surged within her, a blinding fire against the cold. Emily. Close your eyes and hold my hand tight. She willed her voice to remain steady, defiant in the face of the menace swirling around them. Time slowed as Sarah felt the weight of the shadows bearing down, waiting, hunting. Without thinking, she plunged forward, flashlight leading the way. They want to scare us, but we won't let them. As she charged into the dark, she felt the shadows reach for Emily, fingertips brushing against the girl's soft skin. A scream erupted from Sarah, not just for her child, but for every lost moment, every regret that had haunted her steps. The darkness thrashed, ripping at her heart, but she pressed on, a force against the tide. Suddenly, the light burst forth, brighter and more vibrant than before, illuminating the faces of the shadows. Each grimace twisted with pain, their forms writhing as they receded. With each beam, the shadows splintered, a shattering that sang through the air, a melody of liberation. The figures screamed in disarray, their voices turning to cries of outrage and despair. But as the light surged and undulated, Sarah felt a pull, a whisper of something darker, deeper. You can't escape, it coiled through her thoughts, familiar and unyielding. What do you want? She hissed back, clenching her jaw to steel herself against the growing dread. Everything, it echoed back, loud, reverberating through the hall. Just then, the flashlight flickered dangerously low again. With fear clawing at her insides, Sarah realized this battle was only in its beginning stages. The shadows had retreated but were far from gone. Emily, we have to run. She urged, grasping the hand of her child. Tighter, dragging her into the dark corridor as the temperature dropped colder still. Their footsteps echoed against the walls, but the whispers were already finding their way back, lurking just out of sight, growing stronger. Mommy, where are we going? Emily's small voice cracked, and Sarah felt the last remnants of strength wane, panic rising like bile in her throat. To a way out. She led them deeper, every instinct screaming at her to flee. Could they make it outside? Or was this house, soaked in shadows and memories, both prison and battleground? As they turned a corner, Sarah stopped short. A door loomed ahead, old, worn, the wood creaking ominously in the thick silence. This was the last threshold, a barrier between the endless dark and whatever lay beyond. Is it safe? Emily's whisper carried the weight of the world. Sarah hesitated, staring at the door handle, her heart pounding against her ribcage in anxious warning. What awaited them on the other side? Deep breath. She had to know. She had to face whatever was hiding beyond, even if that meant stepping into the unknown, haunted by the shadows that promised to follow, but as Sarah reached out for the door handle and turned it slowly, the chill of lingering whispers enveloped them both, a reminder they would not be free so easily. What would they find waiting behind the door? Would it unveil salvation or doom them to the darkness forever? The door creaked open, a slow and eerie sound that echoed through the stillness like a ghostly whisper. The moment Sarah stepped through, she felt the weight of an invisible force pressing against her, the darkness eagerly probing, seeking to reclaim what it had almost lost. The air shifted, growing heavier with unrealized potential, gripping the space with an urgency that sent shivers down her spine. "Mommy?" Emily's voice quivered, a high-pitched note of uncertainty breaking through the thick atmosphere. Sarah turned, catching a glimpse of her daughter's bright eyes, illuminated only by the frail glimmer of the flashlight that now felt heavier, almost a burden in this dim environment. "Stay close," Sarah murmured, fingers tightening around Emily's little hand. They stepped further into the room, which at first seemed empty but quickly revealed itself, walls covered in peeling paint, remnants of laughter trapped in layers of dust, the echoes of a life long since abandoned. Yet, within the shadows, faded forms writhed, flickering like the thoughts clawing at Sarah's mind, arguing back and forth. "You can't escape." A multitude of voices chimed in unison, merging into one deep, resonating sound that reverberated through the room. Faces swirled in the corners of Sarah's vision, whispers pulling her back to memories she fought desperately to forget. Family gatherings turned sour, faces once warm now twisted with sorrow and resentment. "No," Sarah breathed, shaking her head as if her denial could silence them. She had to be strong. "You're not real. You're just shadows. Shadows born from your fears," they hissed, their words weaving through the air, curling around her mind like smoke. "We will always be a part of you." But at that moment, a sudden surge of defiance bubbled up inside her, a fierce notion that they had no right to claim any part of her. Slowly, she lifted the flashlight, its beam steady, and faced the phantoms head-on. "You don't control me. I know who I am." The whispers faltered, and momentarily, the shadows shrank back, spurred by her unyielding conviction. With every ounce of strength, she pressed forward, her voice growing louder, bolstered by the bond she shared with her daughter. "Emily, we're stronger than this. Together." For the first time, confusion flickered in the ghostly figures, a moment of vulnerability that tasted like victory. But the shadows fought back, lunging toward them with desperate ferocity. And then, just as swiftly, the room dimmed further, the shadows thickening around them, screeching in frustration. "Join us forever." A voice moaned, echoing relentlessly, clawing at the edges of Sarah's sanity. But she refused to be drawn in. "Never." She screamed, voice fierce, flooding the room with light. The flashlight, precarious but pulsing with energy, surged to life, illuminating the shadows like a beacon of hope. "Mommy, I'm scared," Emily cried, pressing into her mother's side, but Sarah was no longer paralyzed by fear. "Look at me, Emma," she insisted, crouching down to meet her daughter's gaze. "We can beat them. We have each other. Together." Emily shouted back, light kindling the spirit of their resolve, and where fear threatened to swallow them whole, that united strength began to push back. The shadows recoiled again, as if Sarah and Emily's unity ignited something electric. Each flicker of the flashlight cast silhouettes that twisted and shrank, pulling back farther into the recesses of the room. In that moment, the energy within Sarah surged, fueled by sheer determination. She needed to finish this battle. But she also envisioned a way through, a joint effort to sever the ties of fear that had bonded her family to those figures of despair. "Emily, on my count." Sarah willed herself to keep her voice steady, heart pounding as she prepared for what she had to do. 1, 2, 3. With a surge of courage, Sarah swung the flashlight in a sweeping arc, illuminating the corners and edges of despair, banishing it into turmoil. The shadows began to scream, cries bubbling over the air like droplets of boiling water. Fury-filled but now exiting through fractures all created by their own fear. As the air thickened, shadows unraveling, Sarah tossed the flashlight towards the cracked mirror hanging crookedly against the wall. "This ends now," she shouted, the collective strength of their bond spurring the light into overdrive. The flashlight shattered against the mirror's surface, a brilliant burst of energy coursing through the room, penetrating the very fabric of the darkness. It was as if the mirror had absorbed that wave of light, the room lighting up like a storm engulfed in white-hot radiance. The shrieks intensified, the shadows flickering violently, a furious retreat unraveling the shrill winds of despair that had cloaked them for so long. The mirrors shattered, releasing trapped energies, the darkness erupting outward, writhing before finally erupting into nothing. Sarah felt the weight lift from the air, the oppressive chill now dissipating like mist, leaving only scattered fragments of light where shadows had once loomed. "Mommy?" Emily's voice broke through the aftersight, a note of the unease still streaming through the remnants of dread, but softer now, filled with a budding warmth. "I'm here, baby," Sarah breathed, heart pounding but filled with relief. They had done it. Together, they shattered the dark veil that had pulled at their lives, leaving behind only shards of what once was. Yet as they stood in the quiet house, moments passed before they ventured into the familiar warmth of their home, the whispers of the past fading into silence. "We'll figure this out." Sarah wrapped her arms around Emily tightly, a fortress against all they had endured. They were home, and home was safe. They had each other, and that was stronger than anything that had ever tried to break them. As the dawn broke outside, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sarah realized they had not just faced the darkness, but they had the power to choose the light always, and with that newfound strength, they took their first steps outside, hand in hand, into a future that wouldn't just be about survival, but about living freely and fully, surrounded by love. Remember, the shadows can linger, but never lose sight of the light within. Now, if you love this intense story, you need to subscribe immediately to this channel so you don't miss the next exclusive tale we're brewing just for you. Smash that like button now to show your support and get those algorithms buzzing. I want to hear your reactions and theories, so flood that comments section. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends because they deserve to see how light prevails over darkness. This is the moment to show you're a true fan.